Well, welcome back to episode 4 of LUMF. You guys keen?
Keen as beans.
We got a good episode this time.
How's the lisp?
I did team meeting the other day and I struggled to get through. I know everyone's showing me grace, but inside they want to laugh, but they're too afraid to.
No one would.
No one's too afraid to.
Sarah
Laughed at you.
You laugh at me all the time.
That's true.
I'm your wife.
That's not. You should be my greatest protector.
It's true.
And encourager.
All right, middleman.
I don't want to be in the middle. I shouldn't have said that.
You love that song.
You
Build me up, Buttercup.
You teased me when I had my braces in.
I prayed for you.
No, you did not.
I would fill you with confidence
and I still, can I just encourage you that
bestow you with grace?
Can I just
mercies,
encourage
you every morning?
This is my life all the time.
I don't like being in the middle. I want a new seat.
You have to stay there.
All right. So today we're continuing through the book of Luke.
Yes.
The Go Espel.
We're still in early days of chapter 1.
Yeah, we're going to make great progress. We're going to increase it by one verse.
Let's go.
What
So
verse?
it's verse 5.
Nice.
It says this. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zachariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abner.
Abinah or Abijah?
Well, J is it?
Oh.
Huh.
Abaha?
Abaha.
Huh?
Huh? Adonai is spelled with a J. Abaha.
Abaha.
Yeah, I was right.
Good job.
His wife Elizabeth, who was a descendant of Aaron.
Aaron.
Aaron. That's where we're going to leave it today. That's where we're at. In the time of Herod, king of Judea. So today, we know he talks about Zachariah and Elizabeth in this verse, and we're excited to get to them. But today, we're going to talk about Herod.
Still introducing these characters.
Yeah. Really important that we spend time introducing these characters so that we fully understand the context of what happens later.
Do you know
on.
what's the worst thing? It's when you're telling a story, you're going through a story, or you've watched a movie before, and they don't spend enough time developing the depth of the characters that's involved.
Is there a particular movie that you could think of?
I just think they rush sometimes. Like, usually what happens is you get a great movie, number one, but then the sequel or the prequel, they like rush some things because they go for the money grab. Which is, I hope they don't do that with Dune.
Like the Matrix movies.
Oh my goodness. They were terrible after the first one. Anyway, we're going to talk about Herod, king of Judea.
Ooh.
We all know who this Herod is.
Well, there's a lot of Herods. Okay, so there seems to be confusion regarding the Herods.
No, there's no confusion. Who's confused?
This is the
Who
Christmas
comes to you and goes, "Hey, I'm Herod confused."
Hey, Pastor Emma, I need a pastor or a meeting with you. I don't know who Herod is.
Oh man,
Which Herod?
which Herod is this? It's the Christmas Herod. Do you know which one that is?
Yeah, he's the one that wants all the babies to.
Well, he
die.
doesn't want that. What he wants is Jesus dead.
That's true. He is on mission against Jesus.
And so we're going to take 25-ish minutes to talk about how messed up this guy is. And what we want people to understand, there's two things. One, the timelines are very hard to follow.
Yep.
So we're not going to try to stick to them because everyone will be confused anyway.
But if you want some juicy reading online, you can start looking up Herod the Great.
Herod the Great, king of the Jews. And then number 2 is we want this to help people understand exactly the cultural, political, and the geopolitical climate Jesus is going to be born into and everything that's taking place. And my hope is by the end of this, you would realize that we live in a very privileged world.
Yeah.
Right.
Considering what was taking place. And a part of the encouragement would be, hey, if the gospel through Jesus Christ can be born into such a messed up society, we need to take stock of what it can do now here in our context, knowing that we don't even come close. At least we don't celebrate and normalize what they did.
Yeah.
We know still evil happens. We know behind the scenes there's many things going on, and we don't want to downplay that. All I want to say is we should take confidence that in this world that Jesus was born into, that seems just so broken, we saw redemption begin, which is powerful. So this guy Herod. Let's start with a little bit of his early life.
Which is interesting. He was born into a pretty powerful family.
How powerful?
Super powerful. His father was like a high-ranking political minister, and he was tasked with the administration of Judea.
Yes.
So he was a PK, but not pastor's kid, political kid.
Politician's kid.
Thank you, politician's kid.
Politico.
We're both PKs. You're a pastor's kid. I'm a politician's kid.
You weren't a kid when he was a politician.
But I'm his kid now.
No, you're his daughter.
I'm a window salesman.
A glazer's kid.
GK?
Goalkeeper. Anyway,
yes.
More importantly, what we need to understand here is that most of the surrounding areas under the headship of another ruler, but Judea is given to Antipater, Herod's father, to administer.
Yes.
For whatever reason. Don't you like that name? Antipater.
I like that a lot.
Do you reckon kids are called that these
Nope.
days?
No, they're called things like, what's a weird name out there? I shouldn't say weird.
No, because someone might.
Yeah.
Someone
All
might-
right, let's move on.
So doesn't he like give portions of oversight to his kids?
Yeah, so weirdly enough, like Antipater has a really close relationship with Rome. He's considered a friend of Caesar. And that's because when Caesar is in a pickle, in a battle against Ptolemy, which is Cleopatra's brother, Antipater comes to his aid. And essentially in that action buys Roman friendship, not just for himself, but the heirs to come, which includes Herod.
Okay.
All right, and so when, what's his name? Herod is how old?
26, I think.
26, 25,
Yeah,
26.
25, 26.
His father makes him
Yeah.
the administrator for Galilee.
Which I think if you look at the context of like 25, 26-year-olds in that time, they were well equipped at that age to enter into such a role. I look at 25, 26-year-olds now and I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't give them charge of like cleaning out my backyard.
We've got to take in account that Herod's grown up in like a pretty like one messed up
Yes.
environment, and two, he's been exposed to a lot of the political like meanderings and the leveraging that takes place. His dad is very important. Like we've spoken about this in many sermons, like what we consider the promised land through the covenant with Abraham. God gives Abraham the most hotly contested part of parchment of land the world's ever seen.
Yeah.
Like we think we see land contested now.
Yeah.
Tell me, what other part of the world has seen so much conflict over such a small piece of land?
Yeah.
And it was happening then too. There's all these small, like little movements, and you had to be smart, you had to be wise, and you had to be like ruthless.
Politically savvy. Like Herod
and
was-
cutthroat.
Yeah.
Like I know, and when you want something, and you need to get it from me, like you're
Are you
pretty
comparing me with
Maneuvering.
Herod?
savvy. No, not at all. I'm just saying, like you're pretty good at, you know.
Whereas you're just like, I want this.
I think clear communication is really helpful.
So, but what we're saying is Herod was probably more of a manipulator of communication in his political
I think
role.
if we were to give him credit where credit is due, he was a master political tactician. He knew how to play one side against the other, and he was also ruthless. Like death and killing. He didn't even spare his kin. Like he throughout his whole time. He's brutal. But I think a lot of this is example to him.
Yeah.
Like monkey see, monkey do. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Which makes you think about like, what was Herod like as a kid, right? Like, you know, like we're born into this world.
I see a Chucky doll. I don't know why.
Oh man, I see that kid that just like nobody likes.
No, but
he's
like
got a
you
rich
think
dad.
he was like a baby one day, and he was like
You can play
held
that
a
with
certain
everyone.
amount of innocence. Well, yeah, and it just shows you like how like, you know,
Yeah, no one's born a dictator.
I know, but he became one.
I've never watched Game of Thrones, but I picture like what I imagine Game of Thrones, like some crazy person and like character in that.
Yeah, he would be.
Yeah.
And I think he'd be the guy that you don't want to succeed, but every time somehow
Just
gets away and comes back stronger.
right.
Like he'd be a great Dragon Ball Z character.
Do people know what Dragon Ball Z are these
To all
days?
my anime fans, I just shout out to Dragon Ball Z.
Shout out.
Herod is Majin Buu.
I don't even remember who those people are. Like,
Me neither.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
anyways.
they're all there right now. Going
Somebody
on, yeah.
does.
somebody's happy that you mentioned
Yeah,
that right
Yeah.
now.
You know what I mean, guys? If you've watched Dragon Ball Z, Majin Buu, he gets like blown up, comes back,
Yeah.
always the same shape.
To that 35-year-old male sitting in your parents' basement, they're happy.
Hey, more people than that watch anime.
I'm
That's actually
kidding.
really bad stereotypical of someone like you, like this privileged white lady.
Hey, women have come a long way.
Yep, they watch anime too.
Okay, back to Herod.
Political aspirations of Herod were like never limited. Like, have you ever had a dream and just thought I could never do that? He seems not to think like this at all.
Right.
Right.
Like we could learn a bit from Herod.
Right.
On a faith level.
Yeah.
Like he put all his trust in a system that he had grown up in and understood, and went for everything. Like he came from being an administrator's kid to like king of Judea.
Right. And it's pretty amazing in the context of the whole Roman Empire too, that he's not part of the Roman Empire, but knows how to play the game
Oh.
with Rome.
He's at the backwater too. Like
Right.
Palestine is a backwater. Like
Yeah.
So he's not like so he's not Roman. Did you say that?
Well, but he's not like this little place that he gets to rule.
Yeah.
Is part of the Roman Empire, but almost separate from it. But he just
Correct.
learned to play the game with Rome to continue to gain power and influence.
he's
where he had it.
turned up at a portion of time where Rome it's like a major power, but there's still remnants of other major empires that Rome is battling, and he takes this like moment in time to essentially play one power against the other, so that he consistently gets upgrade and a promotion.
You mentioned before, like in your opening, like King of the Jews. You called him King of the Jews, right? And so, like, is he Jewish? Like, what's his cultural
Well, we'll
background?
get to
there?
that. We'll get to that. It's
Okay.
interesting. Like, we don't want to like. That's a big
Put
part
that,
later
put that
on.
in the back pocket.
Yeah, that's a big part later on, because Jesus is also called King of the Jews.
Yeah.
And it's
Interesting.
interesting just the correlation that takes place there. But in relation to politics, we could really get lost in this, honestly. Like, we could spend hours just talking about how smart a guy he was. But he finds himself consistently in pickles. He's conferred Roman citizenship through his father, right? Because Rome loved that family so much. Rome loved obedience, right? And they were obedient heavily to Rome. They were there when Rome needed them. And so they have all these privileges. He leverages that. At some point, we see him essentially play the Parthians against Rome and Rome against the Parthians, just so that he keeps getting upgraded and upgraded. And so eventually, we see territorial disputes, and we see, due to his relationship with Rome, because of his father's actions with Ptolemy, he eventually actually begins to seat at some really high positions within the Judean area.
He climbs the ladder.
He climbs the ladder. And so his political endeavoring is on the back of just conquest. But I don't think it's never he's a general for a while, but his conquest is political, but he hijacks actual battlefields.
So he's like a military man as well as a politician.
Yeah, he understood the game of battlefield, right? And what I find interesting is that these guys would play out, it was almost like they loved the drama, but think about it, their drama and the love for drama between Rome and Greece and Egypt and the Assyrian empires coming through Babylon, all those stuff that was going on. These guys played out their drama, and it would cost thousands of lives. But they never think like that.
Right.
It's just their own selfish ambition. So they choose to do this. A few thousand people die. Oh, that was a mistake. I should write to Rome. Sorry, Rome. And then 2 years later, they do something else. 10,000 people die.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like,
This person offends me.
Yeah.
Done. Dead.
dead. People dead.
Yeah.
Just dying everywhere. And it's just all like this political game that they're a part of. And Herod is good at it. Like, very good at it. So this guy's pretty charismatic. And we're going to talk about some of the stuff that happens later on. But at one point, he, to appease his wife, puts her 16-year-old brother in as high priest. Think about that.
So many issues with that.
But he ends up becoming jealous of this teenager because of his popularity, not Herod's, but the teenager's popularity. And apparently, like, rumored, like, closeness to Mark Antony. So he gets his men to lure him to a pool, and he drowns him.
He drowns the high priest.
He drowns the high priest, who's a teenager. Right? And this plays out in so many ways, but one of them is that the teenager's mother, his mother-in-law, writes to Cleopatra. She says this dude is out of control. She writes to Cleopatra, Mark Antony, who summons him, Herod that is, to Rome. But apparently in Rome, he's just so charismatic and so loved that he's returned back to Judea free, without any charge.
It's like classic narcissist.
Yeah.
Like super charming, can get his way out of anything, yet any obstacle needs to be removed.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, with such amount of power given to him, he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know like the stories actually get crazier.
Oh, we're admitting so much.
There's
just
so many
that,
things
you
that-
know, certain people can continue to watch this.
Yeah.
But like, we're jumping over timelines here, but his rise to power coincides with the civil war in the Roman Empire when Julius Caesar is executed. And we all know it's famously done, right? Like, they execute him, they stab him. And this is Cassius and Brutus.
Et tu, Brutus?
Yes. And they flee Rome, and they begin to raise funds in an army in the eastern portion of the Roman Empire, which included where Herod is. Now, at that time, like, Herod's not like fully in control.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find out is that Antipater actually helps, and there's a lot of coercion here, but helps raise funds for Brutus and Cassius. And then Brutus and Cassius end up actually losing the battle. And Mark Antony comes on in, and Herod convinces him. Now, you got to understand, Antipater in all of this is murdered. He's poisoned because of his actions, not by Herod. Herod then talks to Mark Antony and says, hey, look, we were forced under like military like pressure to do this. It was not our heart. We had no other response. And Antony actually believes it.
There's so many, like, it feels like a political, like, whirlpool of just
I know.
story, right?
It's crazy if you think about it.
Yeah.
So to and fro, at the end of the day, finally, with the help of Antony, the Roman Senate confer and they vote, and they make Herod eventually Herod the Great, King of the Jews.
King of the Jews.
He finally gets it. He finally gets what his aspirations wanted.
All through political maneuvering
Yeah.
and
there's fleeing. Like, he at one point he has to flee and go to Egypt. Like, he's when he's a kid. There's tons of like just back and like he endured and experienced and was exposed to a lot of like what we would consider just absolutely like nasty, evil, abhorrent things.
and he follows suit.
And it's classic monkey see, monkey do.
Right.
He, if you think about it, and like this is in our notes, I think it's amazing that they crown him King of the Jews. The only problem is Herod's not a Jew.
Right.
Why give him that title? Is it like, what was it about that title that he deserved then?
Well, essentially, it's a vassal state.
Yeah.
So what they would do is that they would give someone kingship, and their job was to rule that vassal state on behalf of Rome, and that person would be a Roman sympathizer. So because his father Antipater had good relationship, and Mark Antony then vouched for him in the Senate, it made sense for Rome to instill a pro-Roman king, even though he wasn't Jewish.
The Jews must have hated that.
They didn't. They suffered under Antipater, but they endured because Antipater, though he wasn't a Jew, he still worshipped sincerely the Jewish God.
Whereas Herod,
the apple fell very.
well,
far
I mean,
from
like
the
if
tree.
he murdered the high priest, regardless of how the high priest came into that position. He's murdered the high priest, and then he's crowned king of the Jews.
Yeah, I think what we need to probably like come to terms with is that the hierarchy of priests has been infiltrated and now become a political posturing. It's no longer a religious.
Has nothing to do.
No, it's far removed, right? And so, which is pretty cool because now we know why the language "great high priest" being used in that context meant a lot more, since the office of great high priest had become polluted and watered down in its like authority.
It would have been in this setting too that you see like the group, the Zealots, start to rise up, right?
Yeah.
So Jewish men who became extremists because of this. They were passionate for their tradition, their religion, and they saw this thing that had become so corrupt.
And Rome was the one instituting it.
Yeah.
They put Herod in power.
Yeah.
And this guy's crazy. Like, he kills 2 of his sons because it all starts actually when he believes in the rumors that his favorite wife, which, like, the historian Josephus tells us, he loved her the most, but she was cold and proud and didn't love him in return.
But he was forever striving after her love.
She had like a
thing over him.
Yeah, he was
drawn to her.
What he loved was a little bit of the lovin'.
Yeah.
And apparently she was good at the lovin'.
She was good at the lovin'.
He was caught under the lovin' spell.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I don't know, maybe it's a classic treat him keen, keep him mean. Oh no, treat him mean, keep him keen. Maybe it works both ways.
Wow.
For Herod it would have. That he just loved her, but there was a ton of things going on. When he went to Rome, he told his brother-in-law, if I don't return, I want you to kill her because I don't want her to remarry. That's how much like passion he had for her, or just jealousy around her. But when he came back in that time, there's rumors that she had an affair with her brother-in-law, or this and that, and he believes it, and he gets in a frenzy. He strangles her and kills her.
Which, I mean, like, that sets him off. That sets him off to...
He instantly regrets this.
100%. Yeah. He regrets it. This is the woman that had his heart. And this is kind of what sets him off mentally.
Yeah, he goes crazy.
Because the last portion of his life, good portion, was 20-something years.
So he's 44 when this happens.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. The next 25 plus years, he's
so
ill.
Yeah.
And he's been, like, his reign, the political maneuvering, all the horrible stuff he did before, he was preconditioned to operate that way, so it was normative for him. This particular point where he kills the one that he loves, right, that, out of all the things that he's done, it's at that point where something just
He
snaps.
goes mad at this point.
He essentially goes into the desert for help or whatever, and essentially comes back not just, and they think a lot of the illness, like psychologically, is psychosomatic, and it's playing out physically, but he goes in and he comes back and his body begins to deteriorate.
So not only is his mind deteriorating, but he starts having, like, there's physical things that are happening in his body.
Some of it's like psychosomatic, they believe, but then some of it at his death turns out to be pretty horrific. And like, he's going crazy. Like, so he's already known to be someone who's gonna like kill anyone he needs. He ends up murdering, 2 of his sons, 3 in total. This is the king that executes all the babies. Like, now it makes sense, right? But he is absolutely going crazy, and everyone knows it. His body is breaking down. Every part of him is foul. Like, ever think about, like, why didn't someone just deal with him?
Yeah, I mean, like, in a
Hollywood sense.
Well, but, like, I mean, in a way, like, that's how Rome was. So why didn't someone just take him out? Surely there must have been things that he did. And to be honest, like, and we'll look at this in another episode, but, like, he did do some things, like, I mean, like, he expanded the temple, and the temple courts. Like there were things architecturally that he did for Rome. So there was a benefit economically having him in
he was
ruling.
great. He was great. You're right. Like,
So,
Rome loved him.
Yeah.
And I guess no one wanted to go against Rome at this point.
Well, and I mean, he kept everyone else at bay. Rome was the power.
He was so crazy, he would call out for his wife.
His dead wife.
His dead wife. And like in really disturbing ways. Like I don't want to go into details, but just
Yeah,
like, you can imagine serving in his court, right? Like he suffered from pain in the back of his head,
He
and
couldn't
his neck.
breathe properly.
It was coupled with madness. He
Yeah.
couldn't breathe properly. His physicians were unable to help. And then right at the back end of his life, guess what happens?
What?
Wise men from the east turn up.
We're here to meet the king.
We're king of the Jews.
King of the Jews.
Yeah.
And it's not you. Herod's mum's actually an Arab, because you can imagine that.
Yeah.
That's even
right.
greater, like salt to the wound for the Jewish population. But all of a sudden, these guys turn up, King of the Jews.
Where is he?
Where is he?
We've heard. And you're not it. So someone
They
has...
don't even know who he is.
Yeah.
Imagine that from someone
His
who's so
pride is
so egotistical and in love with himself. He's like, no, we don't care about you. We want to see the real king.
Yeah. It gets so easy in the Christmas story just to hear Herod, and you get this picture of him, right? It's like just of a normal guy that was insecure, but then you get this full picture and you think, like what we said at the beginning,
Yeah,
this is the environment that the Savior is born in.
yeah,
Like this is why Joseph flees to Egypt
Mm-hmm.
and fulfills the prophecies that were written about Jesus coming out of Egypt. It's because of all of these pieces. And then when we think about, man, it's so easy to think about our world and think that things are crazy. No matter where you sit politically, like you can look at someone on the opposite side and vilify those
Yeah.
people. But then you look at this time and you think, this is a lot. Yet into this space comes the Messiah. Into this space comes, and to the way he came.
I know.
I mean, every time we come to Christmas, this blows my mind, the
Yeah.
humility of Jesus to come as a human, but as a human baby. Like, but with this kind of pressure, with this kind of stuff going on, a teenage mother that has to think through all of these things and flee, and angels and all of these things. Like, man, God can, if he can do it then,
Yeah.
he can do it at any time.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, you think about the vulnerability of a baby. Jesus coming as a baby vulnerable, and he's at, in any, like, human sense, you're like, he's at the mercy of Herod. And it's not later, it's until later that you realize actually Herod was always at the mercy of this baby, of the most vulnerable one, that he thought he had power over Jesus as a child. But actually Jesus, in his mercy, extends his life for someone like Herod.
Herod dies. Massive funeral, you can imagine. His kingdom then, if you could call it a kingdom, is then divided between three of his sons. And we see that Herod Archelaus, 10 years after reigning after his father, his is taken off him and put under straight Roman rule, which is where we get Pontius Pilate come in and rule over what was that large portion, and then his two other sons make up the other quarters. And then from there we get Herod Agrippa the first and Herod Agrippa the second, and we see mentioned in Scripture. But what we need to understand, and we're going to read this through the Gospel of Luke, is we don't actually have this Herod ruling. There's different Herods ruling amongst the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. But a lot of the infrastructure, because by the time Jesus comes as an adult and we see his ministry, a lot of the infrastructure and a lot of the legacy that we see, and a lot of the oppression, a lot of the hurts, a lot of the pains, a lot of the fears, a lot of the angst, that's all been birthed and created by Herod the Great.
Yep.
His sons are now living in it, but they weren't the main perpetrators, though they had their own issues. Herod has these illnesses, right? So by the time he dies, he's got gangrene on his testicles, which is messed up. He's got a hardening of his arterial passageways in his cerebral cortex. He's got this disease that causes his body to itch all over. He's got worms that are coming out of the gangrene. Like we see that Agrippa suffers from the same thing. Scripture talks about, not from the testicle, but from the body. All this happens, he dies, but all that led to him having this lasting, deep, profound, painful effect on the population, to the point that when Jesus looks, the buildings he's looking at, all of this stuff, it's Herod the Great that is responsible for a lot of this stuff. So when Jesus, for instance, says you can, speak to the mountain and tell it to be, picked up and thrown in the ocean, geographically speaking, where he's talking from, he's most likely pointing to a man-made mountain or hill that Herod the Great created. Now think about just the ideology behind that. Like, everyone would have known, oh, that's the mountain Herod built. And Jesus points to that mountain and says, hey, with the faith of a mustard seed, a child in a manger, you can pick it up and you cast it aside. Like, that's powerful stuff, hey? Herod's messed up, I get it, but he has a profound effect on the world we're about to enter.
Yeah.
And it's long lasting.
Yeah.
Herod.
Crazy.